So basically what I'm here to do is really talk about cloud security. And Tenable puts a very unique spin on cloud security. If you've noticed at the end of my career path, you've noticed me touching on identity back to cloud, identity to cloud. And cloud is the one place where I believe, and a lot of our customers believe, you can't properly secure it without starting at identity. Identity really is foundational to everything that you do for securing the cloud. First of all, you have the public cloud. It is a unique animal. You have new attack vectors. You cannot programmatically push out environments on an on-prem environment in most cases. It's very unique to the cloud itself. You have infrastructure as code, you have identity, multiple IDPs, Kubernetes, and basically container clusters, so on and so forth. Shortage of expertise. I'll give you a little bit more background. I've been on the road over 100 days this year. That's a lot. I've met with over 75, 80 customers, hands on keyboard all the way up to executive level. Number two challenge at every organization I talk to right now. It's number one or number two, but it's always in the top two. Tech debt. I have people that are awesome in AWS, but man, we're getting killed in Azure. Vice versa, or even on-prem. Huge challenge to solve. You have new technologies, not enough people, like I said. You have tooling overload. So really the way that you used to address securing the cloud is point products. And forgive me for the acronyms, Gartner loves them. I'll try to stay away from them as much as possible, but you have Cloud Security Posture Management, Kubernetes Security Posture Management, KIM, which is Cloud Infrastructure and Entitlement Management. You have workload protection, which is just VM in the cloud, so on and so forth. So there's a bunch of them out there. None of them talk together. So you can take a look at a simple vulnerability and you don't have true context. You can have a misconfiguration. You don't have true context. You could have a misconfigured identity, but you don't know if it's going to impact you based upon what it has access to. And then you have limited collaboration. Who here deals with silos? If you're not raising your hand, you're not. You're lying. Because it could be a real challenge when you're working in these environments. And then basically, according to one of our most recent studies, 95% of our organizations that we work with have had a cloud-related breach in the past 18 months. And that says a lot. Because being a former vulnerability management specialist and going out with large Fortune 100 companies, government, public sector, one thing was related to all these breaches. Misconfigured identity. Whether it be Active Directory or you're in the cloud, doesn't matter. Identity is a common piece across all environments. As I mentioned before, point products. What we really try to do and put a unique spin on it is through KIM, or Cloud Infrastructure and Entitlement Management. Really understand where the privileges are, how we can reduce it, going back to simple blocking and tackling here, principle of least privilege. A lot of organizations have gotten away with it, especially in the cloud. It's so new, they're deploying environments. I'm just going to keep giving permissions till the application works, and then never go back and clean it up to figure out what's running afterwards. Talking to my software guy back there. This speaks to the challenge of identity. I mean, you can look at one identity and how the potential blast or impact that it can have in an organization could be devastating. You have not only access to resources, but you have assumed access or assumed roles, and then basically how far can they go. So you can look at basically a spaghetti string of permissions where one attacker can land on your environment and own it within 5 minutes. Context, as I mentioned before, is the holy grail. You can look at, this was a simple bank breach, I won't name them, but they did an awesome presentation down at ONUG in Dallas and how they overcame a pretty large breach. And it all focused on identity, and they drive their identity team nuts, and this is a security team that's doing it. But you really look at, you have a misconfiguration of a resource, you have a vulnerability, and you have an excessive privilege. Led to a $270 million breach. And that's top 5 US bank. And literally just a misconfigured S3 bucket is what it was. So it can be pretty impactful. And this is like, okay, this seems pretty simple. But each one of these in their own is difficult. And then being able to tie all three together that's really where the context matters. That's where people are getting in their trouble, and that's where they need help. This beautiful flower chart of acronyms. But you really look at it, and it speaks to one thing. You have all these individual point products, which have traditionally been used to try to integrate to basically secure a cloud environment. You'll hear the term CNAPP a lot, Cloud Native Application Protection Platform. Really, when you look at that, that's just an umbrella. You're bringing all these technologies into one room or under one roof and then basically making sense of it. As I mentioned before, cloud infrastructure and entitlement management, basically governance of identities and entitlements. I could make a strong argument, and I don't think anybody will win the argument, that if you're not securing identities, you're being irresponsible and you're not properly hardening your environment. Really, when you take a look at end-to-end cloud infrastructure security in 10 steps, discover. It comes down to simple, the old Nessus t-shirts for the old timers here. You can't defend what you can't see. Find all assets, relationships, and access. Manage risk. Audit compliance. List, prioritize is a huge one. Visualize and remediate risk. And then scale. The advantage you do have in the cloud is you can scale, and you can scale quickly. I can give you an example through infrastructure as code. We can find a misconfigured identity. 9 times out of 10, it is an identity created in infrastructure as code. We can show you how to remediate it, do a simple pull request to say GitHub. All your future environments are pushed out securely. Problem solved in one automation, which traditionally would take, I mean, you could go through the cycles of audit, DevOps, so on and so forth. I'm going to stop. I'm going to take a breath. I have 2 ears in one mouth, so basically, does anybody have any questions or any feedback, anything at all, as it relates to their current environments? Like I said, I've seen some really interesting stuff this year, and I can speak to a lot of what I saw, without names, of course.
I have a quick one.
Go right ahead.
Are you going to tie this into Tenable 1?
This does fit under Tenable 1 as part of another umbrella.
Okay.
But you can think of that as basically this being just one more data point or sensor ingesting data or pushing data into that overall platform. Great question, though.
Does this work in SLED?
Yes, it does. We have several large implementations of it in SLED right now, and GovCloud. Anybody else? All right. So basically, number one, discover all assets. We are multi-cloud. So you can pull in data from AWS, GCP, Azure. This slide's a little old. We now also cover Oracle Cloud. Discover all relationships. And this is where it's really difficult. I can look at a couple different resources, having access to a resource, and then being able to assume roles and figure out, okay, how do I get to the end piece, which is either owning the network or getting the data out. And we color code it, we make it as simple as possible, based upon resource utilization, how often these identities are accessing these resources. So black basically means they're using it on a frequent basis. Yellow is infrequently, but still using it. Red means it's basically overprivileged. So these are things you can potentially look at peeling back and then going into a more of a just-in-time or zero-trust type model. Discover what identities have access to which resources and where they are and properly label them. You have third party, you have admin, you have anomalous behavior, and we can pick up on some of that through cloud detection and response. Manage risk. So basically, I try to keep things at a very simple stage. There's a three-legged stool when it comes to securing an environment, and you can use it both on-prem or in the cloud. Configuration of resources, so CIS level, disastig type audits. Are your resources hardened? Vulnerabilities, are you patching them? Not leaving yourself open to exploit. And identity. Are your identities properly configured that they have least privilege and that you're going to limit a blast radius basically when the inevitable does happen, and it will happen. List all risk and compliance violations. This is a huge one. So basically get a list of all risks and violations and then basically start organizing to prioritize remediation for them. You have to start from somewhere, and this is where a lot of customers struggle with too. Okay, we used to hear it all the time prior to Tenable 1. I have 50,000 vulnerabilities environment. Where do I start? This is where we start. So basically, we call them toxic combinations, but you look at a toxic combination as publicly facing workload with a critical vulnerability and excessive privileges. Basically a toxic stew of what's really going to get you in trouble. Start there. So, and we'll tell you, this is basically network exposure is internet, network exposure scope is all IPs, or you can narrow it down to a range of IPs. We say vulnerability severity is critical. So Who's familiar with vulnerability priority rating for the Tenable people here? So basically, you can take a look at a CVE. CVEs are assigned a criticality status or CVSS score. It's static. So it may be something that's a medium rated criticality right now, but it'll never change. So we'll see too many times a medium or a high vulnerability. Actually, there's an exploit created for it, and it's actively being hit in the wild. If you're just looking at a common CVSS score, you're not going to prioritize it because it's down the bottom of your exposure tree. We'll ratchet it, so we call it vulnerability priority rating. So it's a dynamic score. As basically vulnerabilities are starting to be exploited and we're picking up on it, we'll ratchet up the prioritization, push that to the front of the window. Same thing with critical vulnerabilities. You might have one that's critical, there's no known public exploits for it, no one's actively attacking it. Is it really critical? So we'll tend to drop them down in the priority rating. How do you deep dive into these findings? And this is where I was kind of mentioning it before. You can take a look at a simple access to a simple EC2 instance here. We could break it down, open all, USD East 1 load balancer, inbound access. And these are the ports or protocols that are open. We had this discussion earlier on where you'll see a lot of times through code, 22 is locked down, not pushed out. An engineer says, you want to know what this makes my job harder? I'm going to go ahead and open up 22 on the back end. This will trigger a policy violation with something we would call drift, and it will show here. You have MySQL, should not be open to the public internet. HTTPS, generally yes. And then RDP 3389, not a best practice, but it just depends on the use case. Public keys. So basically, you can take a look at here from this simple chart. All permissions are excessive, some are, or no permissions are. You can see initially coming in, it looks pretty good. And then once you get past the Lambda functions, they're not being used. So why are they there? And that's access to the S3 bucket. So that's your data. That's going to get you in trouble. Number 8, manage risk, remediate and drive least privilege, zero trust. Everybody here familiar, especially for the students, familiar with zero trust or the principles of zero trust? Good, good. That's very good to hear. So what we take a look at here is we implement something we call just-in-time access or JIT. As we identify and understand all these overprivileged accounts, you have developers that may need access to these resources, but it's very infrequently. So we go more of a just-in-time model. We can integrate it with Teams, we can integrate it with Slack, or we could do it a manual process or integrate it directly into the terminal. But basically, at this case, it's like user A needs access to this resource for 12 hours. They get access, they do their job. When the time-based token is expired, they lose access. You're back to a least privilege model. Works much better, it's very popular with customers. It allows them to more effectively manage these overprivileges that they now can be very granular with at this time versus having to take a blunt force object to it. Integrate findings, as I said, scalability with CI/CD pipelines. So basically we can take bad code, provide you with good code, and then you can do a simple pull request or it can go to a code review prior to being integrated back into your code repository.
One of the problems that I was in a large organization where we had trouble with dynamic deployed servers.
Okay.
They go up and then they come down. They may change identity the next time, and it's a little bit hard correlating these things that kind of live
By the second.
by the second, yeah. So is Tenable doing anything about those?
We're doing generally we're doing a data ingest every 2 hours. So if these things aren't living for 2 hours, we're never going to see it, unless it's right at that time that we do the ingestion or the pull. So it depends. It just really depends on how long lived they are. But generally, those ones we don't normally see by the second. It's more frequently see by the hour as they're scaling up and scaling down by the hour, every 2 hours, every 3 hours, for the very, very ephemeral environments. So in that case, we may or may not. But yeah, it's a challenge. Anybody else? Am I keeping everybody awake, or are you falling asleep? What's going on here?
That's good.
Good, good, good. It's a little warm up here too. And
Question over here.
If you have multiple AWS organizations,
Mhm.
can it kind of show you an aggregate
Yeah.
of what's happening in
Yeah.
multiple organizations?
We can segment them out, or we can aggregate it together. We can do it because it's pretty common. I can give you a common use case scenario right now is you'll have a lot of organizations will set up their infrastructure in AWS, but they'll set up all their data lakes and everything in GCP. Huge challenge there. Now I'm dealing with identities in both. What can travel across the different organizations? How am I properly labeling that data and classify it in GCP? Then how am I identifying which identities, potentially whether it's from AWS native tools, GCP native tools, or if you're integrating something like Okta or Ping, and then putting all those pieces together. And that's where it really gets complicated. We can map that out, provide intelligence just as if it was coming from AWS or GCP itself.
And is that covered by a product or a service that you offer to?
It's through the solution. It's baked right in. Great question, though. Anybody else? Keep them coming. Basically, scale. Automate findings in DevSecOps workflows. Really, it comes down to automation. Here's the bad lines in the code. Here's what we recommend as good line in code. We can either do, like I said, push it out programmatically or go through an audit review, depending on your internal policies, and then it goes out through those channels. But keep it simple as much as possible. And then why we believe CNAP, apologize for the acronym again, but is the right approach. Critical risk context. As I said, context means everything when it comes to the cloud. If you're just looking at one silo, you're missing the big picture. You're going to get yourself in trouble. Compliance. I'm a huge fan of compliance. I know I saw a couple audit people here. They're probably smiling right now. I mean, truly, configuration and hardening environments, I believe, is simple equating to blocking and tackling. If you're not doing it both on-prem or in the cloud, you're really doing yourself a disservice. You're not impenetrable, but you want to be the toughest nut to crack in the environment, in the neighborhood. Toxic combinations. Really, bubble up what is going to get you in trouble first and probably the worst. And then significant blast radius could take your network down. So how do we focus on that? How do we eliminate them first? Prioritization and remediation. That's the answer, along with automation. And then we do fill a significant gap, as I mentioned before, with tech debt. Through automation, through our ability to ingest the data from the multiple clouds and make sense of it, we do make up for a lot of that tech debt that is commonly dealt with in an organization. And what to look for in identity-centric CNAP. Strong access governance. It's got to be usable and intuitive. If it's not usable and it's not intuitive, people aren't going to use it, people aren't going to implement it, and you're no better off. Deep context and reduce noise. Focus on what's important and kind of the noise that really, what's not important, keep it out of the picture, and automation within DevOps workflows. And that's, again, as I said, that's a huge, huge benefit in cloud versus on-prem. You got a comment?
Oh, well, that's hard to do.
It's very hard to do.
It's very complex. It involves 3 different shops to get one thing done.
Mm-hmm. And we can automate it all in one. And the cool thing about our tool, or our solution, I should say, is it comes out of multiple budgets.
Yeah.
So DevSecOps will pay for some of it, identity will pay for it, our IAM, cloud will pay for it, and then you even look at a lot of the vulnerability management teams pay for it because they're trying, in my opinion, they're trying to bolt, and not to knock Nessus or Nessus agents, but really they're not built for the cloud. You have these highly ephemeral environments, you have different policies, different risk frameworks in place, and it's really a tool for the on-prem. It's not really a tool for cloud environments. So.
Okay. One comment, I guess. I didn't see multi-cloud as one of your panels.
Oh yeah, I mentioned AWS, GCP, Azure, and now Oracle Cloud, OCA. Questions? Oh, is it? Quiet crew, what's up?
If you covered this, because I stepped out for a second, I apologize.
No
You get
apologies.
A lot of feedback from customers that tell you they're using like Microsoft Defender.
Yeah.
And they're already covered for all this stuff.
Well, they say they're covered.
I know, so
Yeah.
my follow-up would be like, what's the 90-second regardless?
Well, generally with Microsoft, it does a decent job in Azure, but when you're looking at multi-cloud coverage within both AWS or GCP, it's definitely lacking, number one. Number two, it does a decent job with Entra PIM or CloudNox, their former, what was formerly known as CloudNox for the KIM portion, but it's only for Entra AD. So if I'm dealing with multiple identity providers, whether it be paying Okta or the native AWS or GCP identity providers, it's not going to give you any visibility there at all. So you're looking really at another point product versus a holistic multi-cloud solution. It does a decent job if you're Azure only, but 85% of our customers are multi-cloud and on-prem, so it's really not going to help them. Not to knock it, like it checks boxes.
So right now you're in GCP, you're going into Oracle, and you're in Azure and
AWS.
You looking at any other platforms?
Tricky question. Yes, I don't have a forward-looking statement on here, but there is another 3-letter company that has a decent-sized cloud environment that we're probably looking at implementing shortly.
Cloud soon.
Oh yeah, if you can get past,
3 letters.
yeah, if you can get past the Great Firewall.
How do you deal with monitoring on-prem environments versus cloud?
Goes back-
Solution is different?
It goes back to his comment before, Tenable 1. I was waiting for it to come up. So basically, we're known as an on-prem vulnerability management company. So it was like whether it be Nessus, Security Center, or Tenable IO, or Tenable VM now. Now you can look at any one of those point product solutions as really one sensor into an overall, basically, exposure management platform. So you have Tenable 1 that sits on top, and with basically Snowflake as our backend or our data lake. You have VM, you have what we call Tenable Identity Exposure, which is our Active Directory solution. So basically we're applying a lot of the identity themes on-prem to Active Directory on-prem. You have Attack Surface Management, what's out there. You can't defend what you can't see. So what does your public security posture look like? What's out there? You have web application scanning for your application scan needs. Am I missing anything? And then cloud, of course. But so we'll bring all of them under one umbrella. We're not there yet, but when we do, it's going to sell itself. Exposure for the analytics. That's where I was going. But eventually it's going to come to a point where a lot of organizations are integrating or have bidirectional relationships between Active Directory and Entra AD. So if we can start mapping out on-prem identities, because a lot of times the federation will take place back on local Active Directory and then go back up to the cloud. We have limited visibility there right now. So we have it in 2 parts, but we haven't tied that knot yet. That's coming. And then when we can provide end-to-end visibility into identity across an entire attack surface, nobody else can do that. Then my job becomes super easy.
So the answer is you do it, but it's not.
We have everything but the identity piece.
Quite yet. But
We have all the on-prem piece, we have the cloud piece, but it's just not
integrated.
yet. It's coming. That's actually coming this quarter. So on the vulnerability side, on the configuration side, and on the exposure management side, identity is probably going to be 2025.
How long to deploy and how long until you have actionable?
If you have the right people on the phone that have the right access to resources in the cloud, you could probably have it deployed in 15 to 30 minutes. You will have actionable data within 12 to 24 hours, unless you're talking about a super large environment where it could be up to 48 hours. But it just depends. If you're looking at 1 million plus resources, it does take some time to generate those results.
Where'd you get those shoes?
Reebok.com, actually. I literally got them 60% off. Yeah. I only shop sales. I have a shoe problem. I have literally probably 40 pairs of sneakers and probably about 40 pairs of dress shoes too. I have a watch problem too. My wife is like, you're worse than me. And she's right. Yes.
Speaking of sales, this is probably not a comfortable conversation, but I do IT audit, and
Okay.
I always get asked to recommend products like Tenable. And my clients range from small startup to Fortune 500. Where do we fall, from a talking about? And is that an appropriate question to ask?
Yes, it is. It's a great question to ask. You can take a stab at it.
It's a great question. I was a plant, I worked with plant.
Oh,
Yeah.
okay.
We do have for partners an assessment license. It works for 30 days and turns off. By the end of the 30 days, you get everything that Frank has talked about. Very cost effective as well.
Yeah.
It scales up. We like to say 1,000 resources for an auditor assessment, but you can go over that. We're not gonna go.
And for actual purchase, you're going to find us probably somewhere in the middle. You're going to have some that are very, very high, some that are like CrowdStrike right now that's giving it away. I'm not going to say anymore. God bless them. But so you have that whole range of possible outputs. But we generally fall, honestly, we fall somewhere in the middle.
Brand of watch.
I'm sorry.
What brand of watch?
This is a Breitling, right?
Breitling?
Yeah.
What model?
It's actually a limited edition, 1 of 500 Japanese chronomat.
I'm wearing V2.
Oh, nice. He's a watch guy back there too. He puts me to shame. He puts me to absolute shame with his.
Does that shirt come in adult sizes?
Oh, jeez. That's a double X. I got killed for this at work all the time. But they brought up my medium today.
For those who don't know, Breitlings are the wristwatch for incident responders.
Yeah.
It has saved my, you know what, many incidents over the years. Serious question. Earlier in your talk, I believe I heard you say that the CVSS score is static,
Yes.
and I'm wondering why. And bear in mind, I was one of the original authors of CVSS,
Mhm.
so it's a touchy point with me. I think it's appropriate to say the CVSS score may be static, the base score may be static with regard to the original vendor. But the whole point of CVSS is you calculate your score for your circumstance. You might start with that base score,
Yeah.
but it's very much dynamic in the results. For example, you could have an issue that's close hold only known to 6 people versus an issue that's just been announced in a presentation at KentSec West. That's in the temporal values, and your result is going to change dramatically.
But my question is how often are they changing that, say, through MITRE?
Well, the point I'm trying to make, though, is the base score
Mm-hmm.
that's set by the vendor, MITRE is reluctant to change from that
Mm-hmm.
for a variety of reasons. That's fine, but it's a point of misinformation and confusion that people don't understand. You can have multiple scores for the same issue.
I think we're reading it two different ways. Because you're taking a calculation and you're making adjustments on it on your end.
I'm making adjustments according to the way the thing was designed.
Yeah, and you got the calculators for it.
Calculation.
But 9 out of 10 people that I'm working with right now organizationally aren't changing them.
Right, and because they don't know they can.
Oh, they do. It comes down to a tech debt issue. They don't have the manpower or the people to be able to affect that. So my point is, just to finish my thought process is, why go through all that trouble if you have an organization with over 100 people in the research organization testing this out, looking for exploits, testing out the exploits, have the honeypots, are paying the threat feeds and incorporating all this data for you. And VPR, we're changing it. That's my point.
Okay.
Maybe we're reading it two different ways, but
But making that clear would be great, and you'd be doing the community a service if you would clarify the base score set by the vendor
okay.
versus the CVSS score overall being.
Fair enough. Fair argument.
Thank you.
Hey,
When is this going to work in ICS systems?
oh, we do have OT actually. I'm sorry, I forgot OT.
Yeah, you have it,
Yeah.
yes. But when is it going to really work? Because it kind of freaks out.
It does? Like,
I don't
can you
know,
give me?
You have a few dozen Windows 2000 servers and 2003s and 2008s.
Yeah.
XP and it kind of goes crazy, and it's also sometimes it scans.
Well,
lots of-
we're talking about two different things. We have an OT solution that's passive. We're not actively scanning anything.
Yeah, that one's like.
So it's actually great technology. Nessa scanner for an ICS or an OT environment, you're playing with God if you're actively scanning an OT environment. You just absolutely don't do it. But we do have a passive scanner for operational technology, IoT environments, such manufacturing. We have several large manufacturers, automobile manufacturers, gunpowder manufacturers, which is actually very interesting. And after COVID, and a lot of the meat production plants got shut down, we're actually in a lot of them also. So, and I've assisted in developing or deploying them in those environments in some cases. So we do have something absolutely passively, and it's pretty cool because once you're comfortable that you're accurately assessing your environment passively, we have something called active query. So if you're Siemens, your Rockwell, any of those native protocols and technologies, we've really reverse engineered the protocol so we can speak to them in their native tongue and not knock them over.
It's manufacturing. They use them all.
Yeah.
They don't pick one.
Yeah. Yeah. You look at a huge strap point for a lot of organizations, you wouldn't think of it as HVAC systems. We have them in buildings for HVAC systems.
For the BMS stuff.
Yeah. But some cool stuff, and great point because I completely forgot about that.
Yeah, I mean, you've got more, on the ICS world, there's more untouched clients
Mm-hmm.
than you have in existence
Mm-hmm.
in your client base right now.
Yep.
But it's just that
Comes down to money.
it comes down to money, it comes down, it's a challenge. I mean, no one wants to risk production.
Yeah. Well, if you're looking past it, because there's a couple other really good competitors also in that space that can assess these environments passively. A lot of times it does come down to money because when they're looking at an environment, it's like, okay, if I lose a day or 2 or 3 of production, what's my cost? And a lot of times it's actually more than what the actual solution provides, but there's no 100% guarantee. So I've run into this many times. It's a very, very difficult challenge because you're looking at times right now too where people are not looking to spend money. They're cutting budget, they're cutting people, they're cutting expertise, and they're really putting themselves in a potential future bind. And there's some great examples. What was it, Florida, where they increased like the chlorine levels in the water to 10,000 times, and thank God there was somebody sitting at the terminal when they saw the attacker do it and stop the process at that time. But that could kill people.
I mean, you've got the Tricis one a few years ago,
Mhm.
they turned off the safety systems
Yeah.
on the production and the oil
Mhm.
producing refinery, I believe.
And I won't name the manufacturer, but I work in the past with a lot of our zero-day researchers. And there's some well-known technically zero days because they haven't been published and there's no patch available for them, that they've disclosed, that they've decided not to disclose. And it's not just us, it's like us, everybody has it throughout the world. So basically if one goes down, the rest are going down with it. So.
Yes, it is a different aspect.
Mm-hmm.
So you do have passive scanning
Yeah.
for
Absolutely. We have it.
ITOT or OTICS?
Yeah, absolutely.
SCADAs?
Yeah. It's actually got some really cool features too, because a lot of times in those organizations, you may have a PLC and then you have all the downstream actors. So you're not going to be able to patch everything. You take down the system, it takes an act of God sometimes in those environments. So what system can I patch that breaks that chain down to the downstream products? And we provide that intelligence too through kill chains. And I was like, when are we bringing that to IT? We finally did it a couple years after it was brought to us in OT. And OT was an acquisition out of Israel. And that's where you'll notice where a lot of, especially a lot of the OT solutions right now, us and our competitors, they all came out of Israel with their expertise in defending their networks. And they're in a bad neighborhood right now. God bless you.
Ukraine will be the next place they come from.
Not pet yet. that produced some really good engineers after that one.
Sticking on the ICS, right, the OT, scanning voice over IP phones, printers and scanners, because the issue is that when such a scanning is done, the printers will start printing
Mhm.
gibberish.
Yeah.
The scanners will do funky things, the voice over IP phones will disconnect calls or start a new connection, right? One of the things with Tenable OT was they had a recommendation saying like, if it's a voice over IP phone or printers or devices, turn the setting off, meaning like, it won't scan.
Yeah. But that's not the OT solution. That's the NASA scanner, VM, or security center. It's a setting in the policy. Do not scan OT devices or printers or scanners.
But with OT, mainly for an asset inventory count, will it be possible to see everything?
We can see it. Let me rephrase that. If it is being picked up on network traffic that is being forwarded to us, we'll see it. But if there's, say, some east-west traffic that is not being forwarded to us, we're not going to see it. So anything that, whether it's RSPAN or whatever forwarding technology or port mirroring technology you're going to use, that'll come our way. But great question. And does everybody understand the whole scanning printers thing? So basically, a lot of printer software is designed to, it doesn't authenticate. So basically, you hit a port, it's just going to print out anything that you do on that printing port. So a lot of customers won't scan printers, or what they'll do is they'll block those ports for those specific IPs for those printers and scanners to keep them from printing gibberish or having to go through. You'll see a lot of government organizations every Friday night, they'll go through and they'll pull all their paper bins from their printers and scanners just to prevent them from wasting reams of paper over the weekend from their scanning. Great questions. Keep them coming. All right, I guess we're good.